Welcome to This Week in Washington. My name is Ben Kershaw. I'm the Director of Public Policy and Government Relations at Independent Sector. This is our policy update on COVID-19 response and recovery and other key issues impacting the charitable sector nationwide. For those of you who are joining us for the first time on an IS webinar, welcome. We're a national membership organization representing a diverse set of nonprofits, foundations, and corporate giving programs working to ensure that all people living in the United States thrive. As part of our webinar feature, all lines are currently muted. We'll pause to ask questions. You can type them at any time, though, into the Q&A box. You can also email publicpolicy@independentsector.org with questions or with technical issues, but the Q&A box is the best place for us to see them. This webinar will be recorded, it'll be posted on the IS website and emailed to you next week. Before we begin, I also want to respectfully acknowledge I'm joining you today from Washington, D.C., which is the ancestral home of the Piscataway people who are still in the area, working to reclaim their land and their traditional practices. I also want to acknowledge many of the buildings and places we inhabit in Washington were built with the labor of enslaved people. So we want to acknowledge that. Wherever you are joining us from today, we are very glad to have you with us. These sorts of policy education events are historically something that Independent Sector has done with its members. We're a membership organization. We've made them available to anyone during this pandemic, but if you find value in them, boy, would we love to have you as a member of the Independent Sector community. I'm really glad to have my colleague, Anna Montañez, with me, as well as our trusted friend and ally, Wes Coulam, from Washington Council, Ernst & Young. Before I turn things over to Wes for an update of where the lay of the land is at the moment in congressional negotiations, I want to pause with a brief step back. Anna and I haven't spoken with you all in 4 weeks, and a major piece of legislation has been released, which you may have digested already, but I do want to put back on our radar. And this is the HEALS Act, the Senate Republicans' latest offer. So I want to do a really quick recap of some of the highlights of that bill before Wes talks about where the negotiations on it stand. So this bill is released on July 27th, again, some weeks ago now. It contains changes to the existing Paycheck Protection Program, largely changes that reduce the maximum loan size and make loan forgiveness, particularly for small nonprofits, easier. It contains a second draw opportunity for organizations that already received one PPP loan. It limits those organizations to 300 employees maximum, and it requires a quite steep 50% reduction in gross receipts in order to qualify for that program. The HEALS Act contains an improvement to prior policy on the amount of funding that the federal government reimburses nonprofits who foot the bill for their own unemployment insurance. It increases the federal rate from 50%, which was enacted in the CARES Act, to 75%. So we see that as a positive development. It contains an enhanced employee hiring and retention payroll tax credit that was also enacted in the CARES Act. And it contains a new safe and healthy workplace tax credit to offset qualified employee protection expenses, such as employers who provide PPE for their employees, cleaning supplies, workplace reconfiguration, and the like. We are encouraged that the sector's advocacy resulted in those being payroll tax credits and therefore eligible even to organizations like nonprofits that don't have taxable corporate income. So why don't I pause there and turn things over to Wes. So there are some highlights I mentioned in that bill, Wes. There are a number of things that the nonprofit sector is pushing for that weren't in that bill, but that we've seen in other bills and in other proposals. So can you give us an overview of where negotiations stand and why on earth we are talking about government relations policy in the middle of August, Wes?
Good question, Ben, and not sure we have lots of good answers at this point, given that we're at August 20th and we're still waiting to see what happens on the negotiations on a package they should have hopefully completed, should have been completed back in July. So as you mentioned, the Congress is considering looking at another phase of COVID relief legislation. As you know, we passed 4 bills thus far, some smaller appropriations bills, and the CARES Act back in March. The House passed the HEROES Act in May. The Senate, the Republicans finally put out their response in July, as you kind of laid out with the HEALS Act. Negotiations did kick off at the end of July, first part of August, but the negotiations were kind of headlined by Chief of Staff to President Meadows and Secretary Mnuchin and the Senate and House Democrats, with Leader McConnell not in the room at this stage for negotiations. And those conversations did not produce any sort of breakthrough, and seemed that there was really not a lot of progress made in the negotiations as they approached the August recess. And then the House and Senate both left town. We've had the Democrat National Convention taking place this week, Republican Convention next week. So they're not likely to come back and engage in further conversations until back in September, and unclear how those are going to proceed. I think there's been some conversations, I think, over the interim weeks and days, but nothing as far as a principal negotiated breakthrough with the leaders, making some promises or commitments on a package. So we're still, unfortunately, somewhat far apart between those two sides on a package. Obviously, the big issue has been unemployment insurance, and what level do they extend that beyond July 30th, which expired. The extra $600 that they put in the CARES Act expired. The Republicans have put forth different proposals at $300 plus $100 for the states, $200 potentially in the most recent small version that McConnell's put out. So they're still kind of far apart on that. We've had a recent skirmish, if you will, taking place right now on the Postal Service funding. So that's kind of now entered the conversation as well for how to deal with the Postal Service's shortfall, which is nothing new, but obviously timely right now with what's going on. And so you've had Senator McConnell put out a skinny bill earlier this week to address some of the small things, or some of the things in the package that they've been pushing on the Republican side, but not an entire reintroduction of the HEALS Act, and certainly does not go near far enough for the Democrats to support. That had in it funding for the postal office, which is timely at the moment. It had the small business PPP program expansions, which were in the HEALS Act, as you mentioned. It had expansions of the of unemployment insurance at a much lower rate than what the Democrats want, but at least they extended that. And there's also funding in there to deal with education, schools going back to school, as well as healthcare workers and so forth. So, and then obviously liability protections for employers, which is a key priority for the Republicans, including Senator McConnell and others on that side. So you put that out. McConnell, I think, was thinking maybe they could get some Republican votes for this and try to move something in the Senate, which they haven't done thus far. But I think that the proposal that McConnell even put out, a skinny version, is lacking the votes on the Republican side to even take it up on the Senate floor when they do come back. So all that to say, we're still at some of a stalemate with the negotiations. I think there is hope that when they come back in September, they'll want to re-engage the negotiations and try to figure out a path forward on a package. The other issue that's going to start cropping up and coming to the forefront is the CR and the appropriations process, which the House, where we left in August, passed all of their appropriations bills, and not by themselves, but in kind of minibus packages, kind of combined together. And the Senate has not passed any of its appropriations bills thus far. So we're kind of also staring down a budget, cliff, and then in September, and how to deal with that. So there is the view that maybe the negotiation of the COVID package and the CR budget conversations merge together at some point in September, and they combine them into one big large package to get them out of the door when they leave town in September. So we'll see how that plays out. There could be, the other scenario where they come back quickly in September and they re-engage and cut a deal on the COVID package between the House and the Senate. There is some movement that Speaker Pelosi announced the last couple of days about bringing her number down from $3.5 trillion. It was in the HEROES Act to somewhat half that amount. So obviously less than $2 trillion, maybe $1.75 trillion if you want to figure the math at half of 3.5. And maybe that's a number that the Republicans can at some point get close to, but they've been pushing for something closer to $1 trillion and not towards $2 trillion. So obviously still they're at differences on the number. So we'll kind of see how that plays out and what they could put in there. For the sector, obviously getting a deal is key, and then hopefully our provisions will get included in that package. Expansions to PPP are important. Obviously, we're working on some mid-sized loan changes. The universal charitable deduction proposal we're working on with Langford and Scott and Coons and others on the Senate side is not in the Senate HEALS Act and not in the HEROES Act. So unfortunately, that's really not in a good position to be negotiated, but there's still hope that at some point they'll try to find a way to include something in there on the charitable deduction as part of this package and part of this negotiation as we push for that. The other interesting thing is the recent skinny bill that McConnell put out this week did not include any tax provisions. So the retention credit expansion that you mentioned was not in that bill. I think there is still interest in doing that and doing some tax incentives, which would include nonprofits as part of that provision. But McConnell was trying to keep the proposal small from a standpoint of dollars and revenue perspective to see if he can get his members to support it. But I think that would come back into play in the larger negotiation for sure between the House and the Senate and the administration. So that's kind of where we are. I think that timing wise, we're not going to see a whole lot the next couple of weeks, given the conventions taking place. Maybe they could re-engage before then, but I think they're coming back on September 8th for a full session. The House is scheduled to come back this Saturday for a vote on a postal service package to enact some reforms and funding for the postal service given the current environment. But that is not likely to be taken up by the Senate in the near term, and will probably just get folded into the broader negotiations over a bigger package at some point in September. So that's kind of a lot, but that's kind of, I think, kind of where we are at the moment.
Got it. Thank you. So thank you very much, Wes. Why don't we turn and see if folks have questions. Again, you can submit those through the Q&A box, ideally, although we will probably see them in the chat as well. So please submit, questions you have right now. I will note, Wes alluded to the Postal Service bill that House Democrats are planning to come back and vote on. So, we've seen press reports for a number of days about House Dems coming back to vote on that. Just yesterday, House Oversight Committee Chairwoman Karen Maloney officially released the bill that will be voted on this weekend. It has over 200 co-sponsors on the bill, so certainly Dems are presenting a united front, and it includes $25 billion in additional funding for the Postal Service, and it would explicitly prohibit any operational changes made this year that impede service. It would require that all election mail be treated as first-class mail, and it would prohibit the removal of mail sorting machines and mailboxes and reverse any already implemented changes that might delay mail delivery. Again, as Wes alluded to, there's been, to call it an uproar, is probably an understatement about the changes in the Postal Service. I will say that from independent sector's perspective, we know how important the Postal Service is 365 days a year to nonprofits. We also know that its fundamental role in every election and in this election in particular. So among IS's top priorities that we continue to push for in negotiations is is $3.5 billion in election assistance funding. And so, to the extent the Postal Service is involved in that, and I think we all believe it is, this is an issue that we are closely monitoring as well, and and eager to hear from you all about your take on it. And so, yeah, we'll see. I think, Wes, you sort of you answered this already, but I think there'd been hope from some of us that the fact that one chamber is coming back this weekend and they're going to pass a bill, presumably, that, right, is, and the Senate has a Postal Service bill. It seems like there ought to be something here before the end of September, given that we're at August 20th. But I know the outlook on that is not great in the immediate.
Yeah, on that issue, I haven't looked at the details, too aggressively, but the numbers are different, right? The House package is $25 billion, the Senate version is $10 billion, and so there's a difference in amounts. And the Senate, the House version has lots of reforms and so forth, the Postal Service, but the Senate is really more just a funding and not going about reforming the system. So differences there. So it's unclear to me how it proceeds, but I don't think it's going to be taken up by itself, but it does get kind of consumed, in my view, with the broader negotiations on a bigger package and become part of that conversation.
Okay. Go ahead, Anna.
Yeah, no, Wes, I have a question. Like, do you feel like legislators are starting to feel the pressure from their constituents regarding some key relief during these very difficult times regarding unemployment insurance? Do you think that could target them to come back earlier, or indeed they're just gonna wait it out until Labor Day weekend? Because clearly, in some parts of the country, the people are in really tough situations. So I was just wondering if it's like, maybe they're not going back home, or if they are they, desensitized with the situation? I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, it's a good question. That's coming. I've been thinking the same thing. What kind of triggers them to get back to the negotiating table and be more, aggressive in negotiating a deal? Because it seems their conversations they had, and this is between the administration and Speaker Pelosi and Leader Schumer, seemed to not really make a lot of headway in those negotiations. And so maybe they did plow a lot of ground, but nothing really came out of it as far as like announcements or movement on some issues. And it just seemed that there wasn't a lot of motivating force to get a deal before August. And I'm kind of wondering what would be that trigger point. Is the stock market have to drop 1,000 points for them to then be nervous? The unemployment numbers and job numbers came out today, going back up from a unemployment claims perspective, right? You have the $600 that expired July 31st. You had also the PPP program expiring August 8th, right? With still money left over in that, and that needs to be, so that's not going out the door anymore. And how does that impact the economy? I think that you're right on the numbers for August could look bad. The question is when will they actually see those? And will it be too late for them to realize that? And that's right now. I don't see anything really to trigger them to come back, really quickly. Especially since they're in the middle of their convention, events this week for the Democrats and next week for Republicans. I wouldn't expect them to, cut that short or to change that calendar. Maybe the week of September 1st, they could come back before Labor Day and do something potentially if there's some trigger. But right now, they're not scheduled to come back until September 8th. And unless something really changes between now and then to force them back, I don't see them, really coming back to the table on this one, unfortunately, because it'd be nice to have them reach a deal sooner rather than later, rather than have this drag on much longer.
Indeed. Thank you, Wes.
Mm-hmm.
So again, you submit questions through the Q&A function. Otherwise, let's turn to Anna for a couple other updates on key issues.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. So yes, earlier this month, the president signed the Protecting Nonprofits from Catastrophic Cash Flow Strain Act, or S4209, which this legislation actually overrides the Labor Department guidance issued back in early April, requiring that self-insured nonprofits must pay 100% of the unemployment benefits cost up front, and then get reimbursed by the states later. Now that this bill has been signed into law, the Labor Department has issued new guidance according to what was enacted in the CARES Act, which allows self-insured nonprofit organizations to reimburse 50% of the unemployment benefits costs collected by their former employees to the states, while the state covers the other half, which is, I would say, it's kind of well, a step in the right direction from where we were in April and what the CARES Act said. Of course, I think that the sector would like to see a higher number, if anything, 100% reimbursement. But I think that that's something very positive that happened earlier this month. And I would say, on another note, there have been some latest development with the census. So earlier this month, independent sector joined other 900 organizations in a sign-up letter led by the Census Project, Oregon Senate leadership, to add a provision to the next COVID relief bill that would extend the statutory deadlines and give the Census Bureau more months to get a higher quality and accurate count from everyone around the country. And this just came, this letter just came out after the Census Bureau announced an administration reversal from its April position in support of an extension. And of course, I mean, the Census Bureau said that they were going to cut short the count for a month, and that was very surprisingly, because we were moving in a direction of probably extending the count probably for 3-4 months, and this is just really bad. We hope that this would happen before Congress set to leave for recess. But it didn't happen because there's no COVID relief package. So hopefully when they come back, this is something that can be addressed. Yeah, because it is really important that we get an accurate count. That's how the government determines funding and a lot of very important things for nonprofit organizations. So hopefully, as we mentioned before, they can come sooner than later to the table, and we get an extension for the census. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Anna. Questions about pieces that Anna raised, either on unemployment insurance from the notes from the Department of Labor, or on the census. Okay. I want to thank you all very much for joining us today. I'm going to put a couple resources into the chat right now, just to let you know. Independent sector, one of these silver linings of some of these issues not being resolved yet is that some toolkits that independent sector recently released to help both your organizations and your members make the case on many issues key to the nonprofit sector. You now have more time to use those toolkits, and so do your members. So I dropped a link to 2 of them into the chat, and I hope you'll take advantage of those. There are further toolkits on our website on election issues, on census, and on broadband, all issues that we are closely tracking as negotiations move forward. So again, I want to thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you as always, Anna and Wes. It's a pleasure standing beside you in this fight. We look forward to seeing many of you in the days to come, and save the date for September 3rd for our next webinar commemorating the centennial of the 19th Amendment. Thank you all.
Thank you.